I first met Mia, my wife of nearly 15 years, back in high school. It was the Monday after I had hosted a party at my parents' farm for my friends. I had asked a family friend, who worked for us, to grab a couple of bottles of sour mashed potato for the event. My cousin Ethan, not really used to getting drunk for too long, decided to leave early instead of recovering. I managed to get the keys from him, but he thought he was pulling one over on me. The next thing I knew, this idiot stumbled out the front door, convinced he could walk the 5 miles back to his house. I let him go. Turns out, about a mile away, a young woman found him crawling through the gutters while trying to get the family mail, since he could no longer stand. That's where I messed up. Before he even left my parents' house, after involving her strict father, she ended up driving my cousin back to his parents' place. My aunt, my father's sister, had to deal with his numerous rounds of vomiting because of his foolishness. My parents caught wind of the whole thing, and I definitely faced the consequences. To them, I had broken their trust, and they were furious with me. No matter how much I tried to explain, they believed the worst. Over time, my aunt made the situation sound like the worst thing to ever happen. I found myself in a tough spot. If only she knew how her son had acted. But sometimes, when people are blinded by their beliefs, they can't see the truth. I just accepted it and took my punishment. I realized early on that the truth doesn't always matter. What really matters is what people believe. That moment marked a shift in how I started dealing with everyone. My dad would say I'd aged way too fast just because of the way I walked after that. One day, after lunch, a girl I didn't recognize stopped me in the hallway before class. She was worried about the wild parties at my parents' farm, claiming there were half-dressed girls and questioning my responsibility. I asked her who she was and why she was accusing me like that. She introduced herself as Mia Thompson and mentioned finding a guy from one of my parties passed out in a ditch near her house. I thought about how far off her perception was but chose not to correct her. I knew how easily gossip could spread in our small town of Harrison, and I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. So, I told her it wasn't as bad as she thought, but I didn't challenge her version of events. Instead, I invited her to come to the next party on Saturday night. She blushed and insisted she wasn't the type of girl to do that. I teased her, saying she might not be, but she looked intrigued. I kept watching her, picking up on her body language, which seemed to suggest otherwise. She called me a horse's back, and I replied that it was true, but a horse's ass is meant to be ridden hard. I added that she should let me know when she was up for it. She slapped me and stormed off, but I swear I saw a small smile before the slap landed. I chuckled, realizing that my reputation for the year was already set in stone. Ethan, who had seen the whole thing, said that after that incident, I was one of the most popular guys at school. I told him Mia had no idea what was going on. He wanted to know what I'd said to her, but I just brushed it off, not feeling like explaining. After we smoked a joint, I laughed because Ethan still didn't get that I was playing a long game with Mia. Anyway, we headed to our first class, and I made sure to keep the playful rivalry going between us. Every chance I got, I flirted with her, trying to get under her skin. If I saw her in public, I made it obvious to anyone around that I was undressing her with my eyes. It got so noticeable that one of her friends started playing the song Hungry Eyes on her phone whenever she spotted me. It was my way of getting back at Mia for punching me in the face. Yeah, I was being an idiot, but I couldn't help it. She had this irresistible body. I was just honest enough to admit it. If one of her friends ever asked what I was doing, I'd tell them straight up that I was interested in her. But Mia made it clear that we'd only have a relationship when hell froze over, and until then, I should respect her wishes. This just made things worse for her, though. Her friends kept asking what I'd done to provoke such a strong reaction. When she explained, they either laughed it off or teased her about it. Mia Thompson, in my eyes, was a fiery redhead from the deep south, a Cajun girl with a body that haunted my thoughts. Standing at about 5 feet 6 inches, she had a tight, sweet figure with curves in all the right places. If she got upset outside of school, she'd let loose a string of swear words in Cajun French that could go on forever. I'll admit it, I actually enjoyed seeing her get worked up. When her friends caught wind of my actions, I couldn't help but smile as I watched her blush over the comments about us. I added fuel to the fire when she wore a low-cut blouse that showed off her cleavage. The way she looked made me feel like I was howling like a wolf, loud, hungry, and craving something more. Everyone could tell that Mia had dressed to impress. And for the rest of the day, every guy at school was practically fighting to get a glimpse of her. I'm not sure if she liked all the attention, but I found it pretty amusing. More than once, I caught myself admiring her perfect little horseshoe-shaped rear and her beautiful curves, 36S chest, a narrow waist, and 34-inch hips. I couldn't help but fantasize about her. In my mind, there wasn't a single act of intimacy I didn't imagine sharing with her. Sometimes I even imagined taking her into the hayloft of my parents' barn, though I never thought it would actually happen. After all, her family was wealthy and mine wasn't. Mia had the wild spirit of a horse that no one had quite tamed yet. Depending on her mood, she could be passive-aggressive or outright dominant. If a guy wanted to win her over, he'd need the patience of Job. It would take forever to understand her and even longer to figure out how to get under her skin and her clothes. The more I observed her, the more I realized how complex her personality was. And damn, that complexity just made her all the more attractive to me. If any woman could give me a blue balls attack, it was definitely her. There were moments when our eyes would meet, and I'd catch her doing something to tease me, just as I did with her. We both seemed to be playing a game, purposely trying to frustrate one another. It wasn't until almost the end of the school year that we both realized how effective our little game had become. Everyone knew I was a fan of well-shaped buttocks, and Mia's was the one that stood out above all others. One day, when I got caught staring at her, 3 of her friends leaned over and wiggled their butts while laughing. Apparently, Mia's mom had once told her that men who were attracted to asses ended up being the most faithful husbands, a belief Mia passed on to her friend, Slim Chloe, which quickly spread through the school. Both Mia and I were set to graduate with honors. She was valedictorian, and I came in second. She believed that if anyone knew about my extracurricular activities, I wouldn't have a chance. We were both getting educational grants, and our last high school dance was just around the corner. After that, I was planning to attend Southern Hills University to pursue a master's degree in agricultural science. The day before graduation, as we left the stage through the back stairs, I ran my hand over her soft rear and whispered, "When will you be ready to let me knock on it?" She immediately turned around and slapped me, saying, "When hell freezes over, fool." There was no one around, and I felt like I had nothing to lose, so I decided to push a little harder. I pulled her close, looked into her eyes, and leaned in. At first, she resisted, but I wasn't about to give up. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. Her eyes widened as I lowered my lips to hers, and I kissed her deeply, forcefully, taking her mouth as my own and pouring every ounce of passion and desire into it. When I finally pulled away, I wanted to see her reaction. I half expected her to be angry or frustrated, but instead, she surprised me by pinning me against the wall. Her aggression matched mine, making the whole situation even more thrilling. She kissed me again, deeper this time, and our bodies pressed together. She grabbed my lap, showing that she was in control, and the intensity in the air was undeniable. Mia told me she'd been waiting for this moment all year, glad I'd finally decided to act like a man. She said she wished I'd told her that months ago and asked me to loosen my grip. I replied that I wouldn't let go until she agreed to be exclusive. She looked me in the eye and said, "Deal. You've been the only one I've looked at since you slapped me." I couldn't help but smile as I brought my mouth back to hers, this time letting my tender side show. As I kissed her softly and deliberately, my hands rested firmly on the softness of her cheeks, feeling like I was holding a piece of heaven. Our kisses were both passionate and open, with Mia exploring my body. A few minutes later, as we were leaving the landing, we heard a noise and quickly held hands, realizing that our relationship had just taken a big step forward. Outside the school, the growing mutual attraction between us throughout the year had only intensified our feelings for one another. Those who saw us leave couldn't help but notice the smiles on our faces, and whispers started circulating in the halls almost immediately. It was amusing because, for the entire year, neither of us had dated anyone, seemingly waiting for each other. I waited for her by the entrance of the school, and without saying a word, she handed me the school book she had mentioned earlier. Mia suggested stopping by Dairy Queen for a milkshake before I dropped her off at home. Chloe, clearly shocked, asked if Mia and I were finally admitting our feelings for each other. Mia assured her that she'd call later that night to explain everything. We left the house hand in hand and headed toward my Jeep Cherokee Sport. At Dairy Queen, Mia went for a Blizzard while I ordered a regular shake. We both went for the largest sizes. In the city park, we sat at a picnic table and started getting to know each other better. By 6 p.m., I dropped her off at her parents' house. Her mother opened the door, and her father, surprised by my respectful approach, eventually gave his approval for me to take his daughter to the dance that Saturday night. He appreciated my respect, seeing it as a reflection of how I had been raised. Years later, when I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage, he didn't hesitate, as long as I followed his plans to protect his assets. After Mia went inside, I headed to my parents' farm. They could sense something had changed in my life, and when they asked, I mentioned an interesting conversation I'd had. Later, my dad privately asked about the redhead I had invited to the school dance. From that point on, Mia and I were inseparable. On Saturday, while my parents were in town, I was up in the hayloft, preparing to haul a few bales of straw after cleaning out 4 stalls with the tractor's loader. I did this once a month, typically on the first Saturday. The horses were in the paddock, grazing in the pasture. As I carried the bales to the edge of the loft, getting ready to spread them in the stalls, I heard Mia's voice calling for me. "I'm up here," I called out. "I've got 14 more bales to drop before I come down." I tossed the bales over the side as quickly as I could, and just as I was about to climb down, I saw Mia's head peek above the floor. I went over to greet her as she finished climbing up. It was funny how open the space was between the straw bales. Moments later, we were lying together on the hay, our arms around each other. Our mouths were closed, but our hands were eagerly exploring each other's bodies. She, like me, was anxious to get moving, pulling off my shirt as I finished undoing the buttons of her blouse. Just as I was about to feel her beautiful chest, we were interrupted. Mia and I might have gotten carried away if we hadn't heard my parents honking. I saw them trying to grab my attention as they approached the barn. Mia and I quickly spread the straw in the stalls, but my parents walked in just as we were throwing straw at each other and laughing. They had come to check on the strange car in the yard, surprised to find a pretty girl about my age visiting the farm. The look on their faces when I introduced Mia as my girlfriend was priceless. I told them that once I finished bedding the stalls, I'd saddle the horses and take her for a ride. Mom suggested having lunch first, and Mia volunteered to help. They headed toward the house, and my dad, with a knowing smile, gave me some advice. "Mia's good company, just like your mom was at your age," he said. "Make sure she's someone you could see as the mother of your children, if you're thinking that way." My father, ever the practical man, didn't mince words. I learned then that he had always had a soft spot for redheads. After we finished setting up the stalls, we headed back to the house. By the time we got there, Mom and Mia had already become fast friends. After lunch, we went for a horseback ride, reaching the back 50 acres. We tied the horses to a low branch and found a spot on the grass near the swimming pond, leaning against a tree. Around 5 p.m., Mia left to get ready for the school dance. That evening, while we were dancing, Ethan overheard Mia telling Chloe that what attracted her to me was my sweet and gentle personality, despite all the teasing. We never took things further, but Mia explained to Chloe and Ethan that she admired my ability to stay calm and controlled, even though I could be aggressive when necessary. "He's patient with everything, but once he sets his mind on something, no one can change it," she said. Waiting for me, like I was the only one, proved that. Mia added, "Ethan vouched for my loyalty, saying he'd do anything for me, just like I would for him. But piss him off, and you'll see just how much you've underestimated him. More than one guy has crossed him, and after he dealt with them, they were lying in the dirt, bloodied." When I picked her up for the last dance of the school year, her parents were surprised when I presented her with a corsage for no special occasion. They said it was the most beautiful bouquet they had ever seen. I explained that I had made it using plants from a small nursery my father and I had started on the farm. I made it in neutral colors so it matches anything, I said. They were impressed. Mia looked stunning in that white summer dress, which highlighted her curves all night. I couldn't think of anything else but her the entire time. It was clear to everyone that we were now officially a couple. She definitely knew how to tease me, and I think she was getting back at me for all the playful tension we had shared throughout the year. As summer came to a close, we spent more time in the hay loft. One day, after my mom found my stash of contraceptives hidden in a drawer, we had a long conversation. It was clear she had some concerns, and soon after, Mia told me she had started taking birth control pills. One evening at dinner, Mom casually mentioned, "The horses seem to like the stalls better now, and they've gotten much sharper in the pasture. I wonder if it's because the straw's taken on a new smell." I almost choked on my food and started coughing, and my dad looked up, asking, "What did I miss?" My father, recognizing my early interest in gardening, nurtured it by guiding me through various projects. Together, we transformed 20 acres of our 250-acre farm into a Christmas tree farm, buying small trees through a reforestation grant. Every spring break, we'd plant rows of new seedlings, making it a special time for us to bond. About 2 weeks before planting, we'd till the soil, repeating the process 3 or 4 times depending on the weather, before leveling it off. This ensured the quickest and easiest planting, allowing us to promote our first crop well before it was ready for sale. By the next season, with approximately 400 trees standing at 8 feet tall, we focused on pruning them to perfection for retail buyers. We even created a labeling system so buyers could trace the origin of the trees. When I was in 6th grade, my father emphasized the importance of replenishing topsoil. We had a deal with the city of Harrison to bring in collected yard waste for topsoil production, which Cape Girardeau adopted as well. Twice a month, I spent a day or two chopping twigs, filtering out non-biodegradable material, and burning them in oil drums. The ashes were then spread around the plot to improve the soil. Once the pile reached the right size, we added chemicals to speed up the decomposition process and maintain moisture. Turning the pile over once or twice a month ensured proper aeration. Local building contractors, eager to get rid of excess soil, started dumping their materials on our land, mostly Missouri red clay. We mixed this with our biodegradable mulch to create a high-quality topsoil, which we sold. This side of our business grew rapidly, and some of the donated soil was used to level and grade land for new greenhouses. It took 18 months to transform that waste dirt into topsoil that could be used for planting and bedding in our greenhouses, which we then sold to the retail market. By the end of the first 3 years, our efforts had paid off. We made enough profit to build 2 large glass greenhouses, heated in winter with gas furnaces, and filled with flowers for local wholesalers. We also created an automatic watering system, hanging from the tops of the greenhouses, that used a network of PCP tubing and expanding hoses. The system was efficient, saving costs and eliminating the need for a pond to collect fertilizer runoff. Over the summer, we built 4 more greenhouses to grow white and red poinsettias for Christmas, bringing our total to 10. My father, recognizing the success of our combined efforts, decided that I could graduate debt-free. I vividly recall Mia's first time seeing our operation. It helped her understand why I had chosen this career path. My father explained that my inquisitive nature played a pivotal role in getting the business off the ground, noting that I had asked the right questions and pushed for change. After discussions with my family, we moved forward with the venture, which had now become a significant and steady source of income. When Mia asked about the farm's history, my father explained that it had originally been a beef operation, but fluctuating market prices had forced them to pivot. By the time I graduated, we had 22 greenhouses, each 240 feet long, 40 feet wide, and 9 feet high, and we were delivering organic produce every week. To meet growing demand, we added 2 greenhouses each for leaf lettuce, bok choy, and English cucumbers, employing 20 people. Our organic, chemical-free produce commanded higher prices from wholesalers, ensuring our financial success. As expected, I joined the family business full-time, while Mia pursued her career as a family nurse practitioner with Sunrise Valley Hospital. Within a week of her receiving her license, I proposed, and 3 months later, We hurriedly married after discovering she was pregnant with our daughter. Our two sons arrived a year apart from our wedding day, showered with love by my parents. Mia, too, was cherished, with my mother becoming our children's nanny, which gave her a renewed sense of purpose. To this day, our children reflect the strong morals and values she instilled in them. On our 14th anniversary, my cousin Ethan and his wife Chloe raised concerns about our relationship during a family barbecue. They suggested that Mia seemed to dominate and control me, asserting that I had become a second-class citizen in the relationship. Despite my efforts to defend Mia, they insisted that I had stopped listening to her, which led to resentment. Ethan claimed that Mia was exploiting my softer nature to assert dominance, and some friends even suspected she had a romantic interest outside our marriage. Taking these comments to heart, I confronted Mia, expressing how exhausted I felt from being treated like a doormat. This revelation shocked her and made her feel out of place for the first time in a long while. My 13-year-old daughter, Zoe, asked my father what was going on. I responded loudly for everyone to hear, declaring that I could no longer tolerate feeling like her mother was treating me as a servant. I warned that if things didn't change, our house would become turbulent. This moment served as a wake-up call for everyone present. It made me realize that, for most of our marriage, I had turned a blind eye, avoiding conflict even when I allowed Mia to walk all over me. That night, Mia and I had a significant argument that had been brewing for some time. I ended up sleeping on the couch. Toward the end of the argument, Mia remarked that I just didn't understand how extra she was. That was when I lost control. In a moment of rage, I grabbed her, turned her over my knee, and spanked her, a method I had used with our children when they misbehaved. She went to the bedroom in tears, locking the door behind her. The next morning, it was clear that Mia was tiptoeing around me, now confronted with a new reality. The following morning, as Mia and the kids left the house, I returned from the office near the greenhouses to reflect. As I lay on the couch, I realized that the change in our marriage had started 8 years ago, a couple of months after my mother's passing. While searching through her bedroom, I found a wrist bracelet with custom-made 18-karat gold charms. The problem was, I hadn't bought them for her. The charms were so sensual that she could never wear them in public, leading me to believe they must have been a gift from her lover, given their expense. I quietly pocketed the bracelet, wanting to acknowledge what I had found. This discovery seemed to confirm the suspicions Chloe and Ethan had voiced. Returning to my office, I kept quiet when asked about the bracelet, telling everyone that I had a lot on my mind. Around 3 p.m., with one of the office staff present, I asked her to call the group my wife worked with to inquire if they were accepting new clients. Alice, a military widow and Chloe's sister, asked why I wanted to know. I explained that I needed to confirm Mia's actual work schedule, as some rumors had surfaced, and I needed to prove whether they were true. Alice, as she walked out the door, remarked that it was about time someone acknowledged what had been circulating for months. Alice, who had joined our company while her husband was in the service, had always intrigued me, though I never paid much attention to her. After seeing her again, I began to realize I was still young enough to start over. The idea that I had options again gave me a sense of peace. I had known her for years through Ethan and Chloe, but now, I felt a spark of excitement about the unknown, something I hadn't anticipated. When Alice returned, the information she shared was eye-opening. Mia's work schedule was not what I had expected. Instead of working every Thursday and Friday until 10 p.m., she only worked one Thursday a month, like all the other doctors in her office. Alice and I talked for a while, and though she tried to be subtle in her questions, she left me with some thoughts that ignited a sense of hope about my future. Most surprisingly, I learned that Mia only worked half a day on Wednesdays. Now, the question was, what was she doing with all that free time? 8 years ago, when tragedy struck and my mother passed away, my father and I were shocked to learn that she had left her shares in the family business to me, trusting her 3 grandchildren to carry on the legacy. During my childhood, my parents had sold most of the farm to a corporation at an inflated price, keeping only 10 acres around the house in their name and another 10 in mine. The corporation had paid off the mortgage over the course of 10 years with interest. As a wedding gift to Mia and me, they passed down the land. On that land, Mia and I built our home. My father took my mother's loss deeply and withdrew from the world for several months afterward. During that time, I assumed the role of the company president, and my father retired as CEO. However, he still came in 3 mornings a week to stay involved and offer his advice. I was aware of a major business trip coming up, one that would take me to 8 different offices across 3 countries to renew multi-year contracts that required my signature. These contracts included product line extensions that would provide new opportunities to increase revenue. The trip would take at least 3 weeks. By then, our company had grown significantly, employing over 100 people and operating 48 greenhouses at full capacity. Luckily, during my first year as president, I had conducted a survey to locate underground water veins and discovered one that would sustain us for years. By discontinuing our reliance on the county water supply, we saved $10,000 per month. We also discovered a natural gas deposit beneath the land. Since the mineral rights had been passed down through generations, we still owned them. Through negotiations, we secured a lucrative agreement with major companies, and even after covering our heating costs, we received substantial royalties every month. In the meantime, my cousin Ethan, who served as our CFO, came by my office to update me on the latest cash flow statement. He revealed that we were on track for the most profitable year in the company's history. During our meeting, I shared my recent discovery with him. As we examined the report together, Ethan was just as shocked as I was. He asked me what my plans were. I told him I wouldn't send someone else to sign the contracts. I planned to play dumb and pretend I had no idea what was going on. This would give the private investigators I was planning to hire plenty of time to discover the identity of my wife's lover. Ethan questioned why it mattered, especially in a 50-50 state like ours, suggesting it wouldn't make a difference in divorce court. I explained that Mia's father, John Thompson, had always been a manipulative man. Before Mia and I married, he insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement, and I suspected Mia had conveniently forgotten about it. Ethan asked if John's wealth, much of it from fracking, was the reason. I explained that if we divorced because of infidelity, the guilty party would walk away with nothing, just the clothes on their back. That evening, when I arrived home, something was different. My wife seemed to treat me with a respect that had been missing for years. It was clear to both of us that our relationship had shifted in some way. Mia was trying to figure out what I knew, and I could sense her wariness. An interesting detail. That morning, my father had left for a 2-day fishing trip with childhood friends, something they had been encouraging him to do for years. He wouldn't be back until I returned. During his absence, Mia had been home more often than usual, raising my suspicions that something was going on in his life. A few days later, my daughter told me that Mia had been frantically searching for something and questioning the children about it. "Daddy, Mom accused us of going into your bedroom and going through her dresser drawers," Zoe said, noting the emotional weight behind what her mother was looking for. When I came home that evening, I asked Mia about it, but she dismissed it as insignificant. When I mentioned Zoe's concern, Mia suggested that Zoe might have misunderstood, promising to clarify things after dinner. At dinner that night, I noticed Mia acting differently, as if she was trying to figure out what I knew. After dinner, while she was putting the boys to bed, my daughter asked me about the situation. I replied, "Zoe, I'm not sure. People have told me things, and if they're true, things are going to get a lot worse around here for a while. It's going to take your parents some time to sort this out. Just remember, this situation isn't because of you or your brothers." It had been 3 weeks since I discovered the bracelet with the 16 charms, valued at $8,000 each. The platinum and gold combined made the chain worth $20,000. Whoever had given her this bracelet had ordered it from one of the most renowned jewelers. The charms, each commemorating special moments in their relationship, suggested a secret that had been going on for years. If she received 2 charms a year, perhaps for birthdays and anniversaries, that meant the affair had likely been going on for about 8 years. Though I was reluctant to accept it, the circumstantial evidence was undeniable. I adjusted my schedule and booked a hotel room in St. Louis to meet with the private investigators and get a full report before continuing my business. When the investigators handed me the report, I feared the worst. My wife's lover, someone I had known all my life, was confirmed. The investigators provided a detailed written report and a flash drive containing recorded evidence. After paying them, I sat down to go through the information, and I found it so thorough that I wondered how I hadn't physically collapsed from shock. Fortunately, on my way back from Canada, I had picked up a couple of bottles of scotch, which I drank while reviewing the report, trying to numb the pain. Summoning my courage, I reached out to my former father-in-law, John Thompson, and asked for his personal email address. John, a proud man with firm values, had always prided himself on his principles, but I knew he'd be deeply distressed by the report I had in hand. I also knew that if I didn't share the truth with him, he would help John undermine me in our divorce. I told John the first needed him to understand what was coming because he wouldn't believe it if I just told him. I explained that I'd received the dossier only 2 hours earlier, and it had cost me $6,000. After sending the letter to his email via my laptop, I waited for his inevitable call. John Thompson might have appeared to be the epitome of the simple, down-home man at first glance. At over 6 feet 5 inches tall, he had the same clumsy awkwardness as anyone else in his youth. The son of a successful alligator hunter, John had inherited his father's wealth but maintained a humble, unpretentious demeanor. He was a man who gave off the impression of being slow-witted. But many who underestimated him were deceived, unaware of the sharp intelligence he hid beneath the surface. When he was interested in something, he could dive into research with obsessive detail, starting from the basics. CEOs, who thought they had sealed a tough deal, would often be stunned to learn John had only been with their company for 6 months. Yet, during his time, he had increased their profitability and productivity by identifying their weaknesses, saving millions in the process. The phone call came sooner than I expected. John was on the line, sounding both surprised and shaken. He told me that if I had come to him earlier, he would have called me himself. He accused me of being the biggest liar in the country and demanded to know just how bad things were going to get. I told him I planned to do to them what he had done to me, with no mercy. John, surprisingly calm, responded that he understood my anger and absolved me of blame, saying he'd burn anyone for what they had done to me. He asked that I promise not to take action before we spoke in person, assuring me that our conversation wouldn't be recorded. John, a man with deeply held religious views and a rigid moral code, had earned respect for his ability to stick to his principles. I suggested to my father that we take the boys fishing the first Sunday after I returned home. He agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to handle a few things while also bonding with the kids. He was curious about what had made me so suspicious, so I explained that I had found a bracelet with numerous charms. I had it appraised and discovered it was custom-made. Just last Monday, while in Montreal, I arranged to have it shipped to my wife from Paris. It would be delivered piece by piece to her workplace with a note attached. My plan was to contact John and his lover at the right time, so they could understand the cost of my silence. I made sure all 16 charms would be in her possession by the time I returned home. John was concerned. He feared that my wife and her lover would become unhinged once they saw the first courier delivery. I reassured him, explaining that the time I bought would allow me to find a buyer for my shares in the company. Selling out my father's dream would hit him harder than anything else, throwing them off balance psychologically for the foreseeable future. John seemed to understand my reasoning. I also told him that the fear would grow as the day of my return approached. When he asked how much longer my trip would last, I told him I had 2 more weeks living out of a suitcase. I added that, from the moment the first courier letter reached my wife, they'd be walking dead. I joked that it would have been easier if they were actually dead, but that would have been too simple. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing John wouldn't hesitate to take matters into his own hands when necessary. Coming from the swamps, he was no stranger to solving problems without asking questions. While staying at the Trump Hotel in New York City, I received some unwelcome news. The detective's call came after 9 p.m., and the shock hit me hard. My father had passed away. I needed more details, and what I learned only deepened my disbelief. Apparently, my wife and my father had decided to take a swim in the southern end of the pond where Mia and I had spent so much time when we first started dating, back when the kids were at school. They'd gone for a horseback ride to cool off. My father had arrived at the pond before Mia, thanks to the hot weather. Local authorities later suspected that someone had released a pet alligator into the pond a couple of years ago, and it had adapted to its new home. After divers removed the alligator, they found my father's body. Mia was unharmed physically but was clearly struggling emotionally. The children stayed with their grandparents while Mia tried to regain control of the situation. Returning to my desk, I shared the devastating news with the few people still in the office, then excused myself to attend to personal matters. As I walked back to my room, I couldn't help but wonder about the consequences of crossing John Thompson. In his world, mistakes were never left unresolved. I couldn't help but wonder about John's plans for his daughter. After pouring myself a stiff drink, I called him, and he answered right away. I started by asking how the kids were doing. John casually replied, in his usual slang, that they were upset but that it was nothing out of the ordinary for their age. I asked if I could speak to them if they were still awake, and he handed me the phone. I spent the next hour talking to all three kids before returning the phone to Grandpa. Mia had managed to explain that my father had drowned when an alligator dragged him away. They found his body undressed, with several dead animals in the refrigerator. Though his body wasn't bitten, there were a few scratches, so John recommended a closed casket. I thanked my father-in-law and told him I would be home Saturday morning to handle the funeral arrangements. I also mentioned I needed to call Mia and check on her. John agreed, adding that sometimes, in situations like this, appearances needed to be maintained. Before hanging up, I called Mia. The call was painful. She was in a state of emotional collapse, unable to stop crying. She couldn't comprehend how they hadn't noticed the alligator during their weekly horseback rides. I asked her if it was typical for them to swim undressed, and she broke down completely, dropping the call. At that moment, I knew she realized I was aware of the truth. The next morning, during a business meeting, I received a call from the same detectives who had contacted me the previous night. They informed me that my wife had fainted from grief and tried to drown her sorrows. A gas explosion had occurred, blowing out part of the house. Unfortunately, she didn't escape in time and was fatally crushed by debris. I requested they expedite the process, explaining I needed to fly out urgently. They were understanding, and I managed to secure a better deal than I expected. That evening, I caught the last plane to the Cape. When I arrived, I found John waiting for me. He told me that my wife and he were relying on me and the grandchildren to stay with them until everything settled. This would give me time to get things organized and handle any other matters. I asked how my mother-in-law was coping, and John revealed that she had struggled until the police informed them earlier that day that she had been my father's longtime mistress. Their suspicions were confirmed when they discovered blackmail notes that Mia had been receiving in my father's office. I commented that it must have upset them. John nodded, adding that it was a bracelet with 16 erotic charms, all undressed, which could be seen as a token of what lovers did back then. He mentioned they planned to talk to me after the funeral. I asked how we should meet, and John suggested I bring the prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's report with me to show them immediately. This would prove I had no motive to frame them. I smiled, recognizing that he was reminding me to be transparent. The more upfront I was, the less likely they would consider it a homicide. Dad and I went to the funeral home together to select a casket. We agreed on a closed casket for both of them. Afterward, I called Ethan at the office, informing him that the contracts had been signed and I would be taking a few days off. The funeral and the tea party that followed had a considerable turnout. Given everything, I think my kids handled it well. I did my best to stay composed, but there were moments when my emotions slipped through. While many speculated about the close relationship between my wife and my father, nothing was publicly said about it. The detectives waited patiently as fire inspectors finalized their report on the gas explosion at my house. They determined the cause was a faulty installation made while I was away. With this report, I would have legal grounds to sue the gas company for negligence, wrongful death, and the loss of my home. As for the alligator, they found no evidence to determine when it was placed in the pond. I handed the detectives the prenuptial agreement and the private investigator's report, using my father-in-law's printer to give them copies. The detectives appreciated my transparency, as it addressed any potential issues that might arise when others reviewed their final report. Afterward, I sat on the back patio with Mia's father, enjoying a cold beer. He mentioned that he and his wife were planning to update their will, leaving everything to the kids in a living trust that I would manage until they turned 30. I told him it didn't matter if he was involved in what happened. I felt that karma had already dealt them what they deserved, and it was best to leave it at that. John smiled, complimenting me, saying he always knew I was a smart man who knew exactly what to say when needed. Later, while shopping at Macy's with the kids, I ran into Alice. We had moved into my father's house during the remodel of ours, which was in a state of disrepair and needed a lot of work. I explained to Alice that we were buying new things because we didn't have much left. I also introduced her to my 3 children, Zoe, Jack, and Sam. We decided to start with the boys, figuring out their likes and dislikes, and bought enough underwear, t-shirts, jeans, shirts, jackets, and other essentials to last them for 2 weeks. After paying, I made 6 trips to the car, feeling completely exhausted by the end, especially after the final trip carrying their new shoes. The kids suggested Alice come with us to our temporary home and return with me afterward to help pick out a new closet. Alice hesitated, not wanting me to think she was meddling in matters that didn't concern her. However, Zoe firmly stated that I should go with Alice and then take her out to dinner to show our appreciation for her help. And that's exactly what we did. After dropping the kids off and unloading everything, Alice and I returned to work for another 4 hours. I invited her to dinner afterward, and she mentioned that she had called Zoe to get her approval and arranged to have their favorite pizza delivered. When we got home, the big question from Zoe surfaced. Daddy, are you going to ask her out on a real date? And that's a question that remains unanswered for now.